Blender's barrier to entry is pretty low. Any bozo with an index finger and some free will can click download and get to work. It's that same ease of use that has made Blender's community massive, which is amazing. But that also means that there are so many fledgling young artists that just waltz right into the industry and make themselves at home without understanding the fundamentals of one of Blender's primary functions, animation. And that's okay, it's nothing to be ashamed of, but we are going to fix it. Today we'll cover a few rules of animation that will help us in animating this adorable, bouncy mammoth. My name is Elijah Sheffield, I go by Sweet Boy Motion on the internet. I'm an animator, illustrator, and a friend to all mammoths. Today we're going over 3 of my favorite principles of animation. That's spacing, overlapping action, and squash and stretch. Now there are 12 principles of animation in total that are widely used in efforts to make smoother, more dynamic animations. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with, if not the 12 directly, at least the principles in theory. But even if you know the principles and are a competent animator, you may struggle to translate that know-how into a 3D space utilizing some of Blender's awesome animation tools. That's where I come in. Now before we get started, be sure you download the project file so you can follow along. It'll be linked below. I've created for you a mammoth, rigged and ready to go. So the only thing you'll have to focus on today is embracing the fundamentals of animation. Our first principle is spacing. Spacing is a term that refers to the gaps in between frames that creates the illusion of speed or weight. Take a look at this friendly caveman skull and notice how each frame is equally spaced out, represented by twigs. This spacing is called linear interpolation and provides no real information about the object's weight, speed, or mood. Now compare it to this skull. You'll immediately notice the difference in the way that it feels. It feels heavy, slick, has a little bit of attitude. Now pay attention to the spacing of the frames. There are more frames at each extreme and fewer frames in the center of its movement, creating the illusion of weight and speed. You may know this concept as ease or Bezier curve animation. The more distance the object travels per frame, the faster the object appears to move. And the less distance an object travels per frame, the slower the object appears to move. So let's employ this principle and make some smooth jumping animation for our mammoth. Alright, so here in Blender, we have our nice little mammoth. You might notice there are some rings around him, and that's just a rig. If you've never used a rig in Blender, it is very, very simple. We're going to go up to the top left here, and we're going to go down to pose mode. And as you can see, now we have individually colored controllers, and we can just use those to control different pieces of the mammoth. So right here we have a head controller, we've got a center of gravity controller, and then controllers for each leg, for the leg and the knee as well. Additionally, if we go down to our data properties panel down here, it's the little green guy going like this, we have the option to toggle on and off some of these bone collections. By default, the basics is on, but we can toggle that on and off with this little eyeball right here. And there's also one called overlap. If I toggle that on, you see we get controllers for the trunk, for the little hair tuft, the ears, and the tail as well. We'll be using those a little bit later in the tutorial, but for now, we can just actually turn those off for the sake of visual simplicity. Now, the last thing we're going to do here before we actually get into the animation is we're going to give ourselves a window for the graph editor. So let's go ahead and go to the bottom right here, and we can just drag this out. As of Blender 4.4, we can actually snap to the middle, which is super fun, so there's no more guesswork. Let's go to the top left of this right viewport, and we're going to go over to the animation tab and down to graph editor. And now we have a graph editor open. So now we can actually get to the animation portion. So we're going to start at frame 0, and I'm going to hit in to open this side panel, and I can go up to item, and I'm going to add a keyframe with the center of gravity controller right here. I'm going to add a keyframe into the Y value. Now, if you're familiar with Blender, you know the up and down axis is actually the Z axis, but in the bone space, it's the traditional Y axis as the up and down value. Just something to keep in mind. So with a value added into the y-axis, I'm now going to go forward to frame 10, and I'm just going to move him up. And I'm not sure what the anatomically correct height is of a mammoth jump, but I think about 0.3 feels historically accurate. So we're going to have that at 0.3 in the y value. And now I'm going to scrub forward to frame 20, and I can just copy this keyframe right here in the timeline, or I can copy it over here in the graph editor with Command or Control C and Command or Control V. And now he jumps. Yay, that's awesome. But we want him to jump multiple times throughout the duration of our timeline. So we have 60 frames down here, as you can see in the timeline, or as you can see up here in the graph editor. And I want him to be jumping the entire duration of that. So I could just copy and paste these keyframes, but that would be a very mundane and annoying way to do that. So instead, we're going to use something called an animation modifier. This is one of my favorite things about Blender's graph editor, is that you can add little modifiers. It works a lot like expressions or something like that, but it just impacts the way that the animation plays out. So if we select one of the keyframes here, we can go up to the tab of modifiers. If you don't see that, if that's not open for you, you can hit in to toggle that open or closed. And if it's not showing up, just make sure you have a keyframe selected. And now under the add modifier dropdown, we can add cycles. Now this might be a little bit confusing because there is a cycles renderer in Blender, but this is also the name of one of their animation modifiers. So cycles works very similarly to loop in or loop out in After Effects. And as you can see right here in the graph editor, we see our animation from frame 0 to frame 20 repeated in perpetuity in the graph editor. So if we play that back, we can see our nice little mammoth bounces up and down repeatedly, and it doesn't look great, but it is on repeat. So now we need to add a little bit of pizzazz. I'm gonna go up and hit normalize just so it is kind of stretched across my screen here. And I'm gonna hit in to close this side panel so we get a little bit more screen real estate. So as of now, the reason that this looks so goofy is because it's still interpolated linearly. So there's an equal amount of frames from point A to point B. But I want there to be a lot more frames at the very top of his animation, which we'll call point B, I guess, and a lot fewer frames at the bottom of the animation, which we'll call point A. So point A should be a very quick pounce on the ground, and point B should be this very nice suspension. He should feel very weighted when he's up in the air. So let's go ahead and select all of these keyframes with either A, or you can drag and select. And we're gonna go up to key and down to interpolation mode, and we're gonna change this to Bezier. Now, if you are a hotkey fanatic, that will be T on the keyboard, and you can access all of your interpolation types. So now we have Bezier curves, and if we play this back, it is different, but it's not necessarily better. So what we need to do now is make sure that there is a substantially larger arc at the very top and very short, tiny arcs at the very bottom. So what I can do is select both of these at the very bottom. I can go up to the top right and change my pivot point to individual centers. And another cool thing about Blender's graph editor is you can actually transform the keyframes and their Bezier handles using the exact same controls that you would in the viewport. So for example, I can hit S and it will scale my keyframes and their Bezier handles, which is super cool. And because we have individual centers as the pivot point, it will scale each of these keyframes from their individual origins, which is awesome. So we can now grab the top one and scale it out by hitting S on the keyboard just like that. And if we play that back, it looks just like a bouncing little mammoth. Now, for the sake of brevity and keeping this tutorial lean, I'm not going to animate the legs individually, but I would highly suggest you go back through and animate the legs so that he has a little bit more propulsion as he's jumping up. Now, just by making this small tweak to the spacing, our mammoth went from this flat, stilted movement to a really springy bounce that helps communicate his speed and weight. Now, I know what you're thinking. Man, Elijah sure has a great mustache. I wish I could learn Blender from him in a more focused setting with the structure of a course. Well, I have great news for your super specific wish. School of Motion and I teamed up to create Blender for 3D artists, a brand new course where I walk you through all the topics necessary to become dangerous in Blender. From modeling, animation, texturing, and even the fun stuff like grease pencil and geometry nodes, we cover it all in a comprehensive way that gets you simulated real-world practice. If you want to grow your 3D arsenal, jump ship from another expensive 3D package, or you just really like spending time with me, check out Blender for 3D artists. It's linked below. Our next principle is overlapping action. Overlap is the idea that different parts of a character or an object move at different speeds, making the animation feel lively and fluid. Think of the last time you were texting in traffic. All of a sudden you see brake lights. You slam on your brakes, the car stops, but your phone goes flying and your seatbelt gives you a nice tight hug. That's physics, baby. And the same idea applies in animation. So take a look at our Stone Age contraption here. The stone wheel that I've reinvented is the driving force moving at an aggressive speed back and forth. Without overlapping action, it looks rigid, and you almost wouldn't guess it's supposed to be a rope holding a skull below. So now check out the addition of overlapping action. The attached stone is affected through transferred force, so it keeps going with the overlapping action, extending farther past the spectrum of its parent. This idea is really useful for secondary animation on stuff like tails, hats, or in our case, trunks. So let's pop back into Blender and add some overlapping action. Okay, so before we actually animate the trunk, we need to do a couple of things. The first is we actually need to turn on the controllers for the trunk. So if you remember, we actually have a couple of different bone collections. So if we go to our data properties panel, it'll be the little green guy like this. You can turn on the overlap bone collection and we can just turn off the basics. That way we have a little bit more of a tidy looking screen here. So I'm going to snap into orthographic view and let's go ahead and enter into pose mode. So if we were to do a proper wave animation, we would probably need all three of these bones to be working in tandem. However, I want to keep things really light. I want to keep things lean. If you want to get deeper into wave animation, there are absolutely videos and tutorials and a billion resources to do that. However, for this, we just want a nice overlapping action. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this up because I want the trunk to just be kind of facing straight out like this so it can animate kind of like that. So before I actually start animating this out piece by piece, I can actually use the annotation pencil to kind of give myself a plan, give myself a blueprint. So let's go ahead and click the annotation pencil right here. If you don't see that, you can hit T to toggle this side panel open or closed. And we're going to start at frame 0. So if we need to go back and give a little bit of context, we can see that frame 0 is him just touching down for the first time. So he's coming down and frame 0, bam, he touches the ground, which is great. So at frame 0, where he's touching the ground for the first time, if we think back to the illustration of the skull and the rope, the skull would still be falling as well. So I'm going to just draw a little circle here. I'm drawing with a mouse, so you have to forgive a little bit of the roughness of it. And I'm just going to draw a little semicircle here. So the trunk should still be falling at this point. And if we go to frame 2, if we go forward a couple frames, we now can draw a kind of frowny face right here. And we can draw the weight at the end of it. Because now the skull or the weight or the trunk, whatever mixed metaphor you want to use, is now catching up and it is dragging a little bit behind. So now we go forward to something like frame 8 or 9 right here. And it's now pretty much caught up to the correct weight. And as the mammoth kind of levels out and he's suspended in air, the weight of the skull or the trunk is catching back up to him. So now this is leveled out. It's about equal. It's actually kind of in the pose that it's out right now. And then as we go forward to something like frame 14 or 15, it actually starts to kind of take shape into the upside down arc now, the smile shape. And by frame 18, it's starting to do that even more, starting to form that. And by frame 20, we're right back into the smile that we started with. So if we play this back a little bit, I'll just kind of scrub through here. We see that we get a nice like whipping action, which will work perfectly. So now that we have a little annotation here, we can go back in and actually populate each controller with these shapes. I'm going to go into my object select mode, and I'm going to hit N to open the side panel. And with this controller selected, at frame 0, I'm just going to add an X keyframe. And now I can go to the second controller right here, and I will add another X keyframe. So I'm going to go forward 2 frames, and I'm just going to adjust this shape, kind of match it to the reference, something like that. And I'll go forward to the next one, which is frame 8. And this should be a little bit out like this, so kind of straightened out here now. You know what? This is going to still drag behind just a little bit. And the next frame is frame 15. This is already starting to go into that crescent again, but this one is still not super sold there yet. And now frame 18, this is starting to unfurl like that. And then frame 20, we will return to our base pose, which actually frame 20 needs to be a lot more curled like that. So I'm going to change that on frame 20, copy that, and come over to frame 0 and paste these values. Okay, so if I kind of look through that, that's honestly looking pretty good, but just like the problem we had previously, we need to add a cycles modifier. So I'm going to hit N to open this side panel here, grab one of these keyframes, go up to modifiers, and I will just add a cycles. I can copy that to my clipboard and go to this controller right here, grab a keyframe, and paste it. So now we have it looping perfectly. I can hit N to close that sidebar, and we can see it looping. And it looks okay. There's obviously a few things, so let's go through and kind of diagnose some of these problems. So starting with the middle controller here, we can see that as it comes down like this, we can kind of just pull this out a little bit more, give it a little bit more leeway like that. So it's still kind of working on it. And then about right here, we kind of want this to be a little bit more of a dramatic take into it. Something like this. Now, if we grab this second controller, we can do something similar. We just need to kind of shape this out. So I'm going to grab this keyframe. I'll pull it down right here, and then I'll start to kind of shape out the exact same thing from our first controller. In fact, if we look at this back now, and we play this back, we can see that's working pretty good. So now we need to take this animation and clean it up a little bit with some spline animation. Something really cool about Blender is the ghosting feature. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take all of the keyframes right here in this first controller right here, and then we'll do the same to the second. But we're going to take all of these keyframes right here. We can hit A or drag and select them, and we're going to go up to the top right of our graph editor. We're just going to click Create Ghost. And nothing really happened unless you go in here and you start moving these keyframes around. And as you can see now, as we move them around, we get the dotted outline of the animation curve that we just had. So what this allows us to do is take all the ancillary keyframes that are not necessarily the peaks and values and the most important keyframes, and we can hit X to delete them. We can just get rid of them. And now we can select all of them with A or dragging and selecting, and then we can change them to Bezier. So we can go up to Key, down to Interpolation mode, and change this to Bezier. You can also do that by hitting T on the keyboard once again. And now that gave us Bezier handles to start playing with. So because we now have a guide, we know exactly how it's supposed to move. So we can drag these out to kind of match the ghosting guides that it just gave us. And we can kind of align these guides with exactly what we just did. And now we can do the exact same thing for the second controller here. So as you can see, we kind of get the guides from the previous controller right here, still ghosted right here. But if we want to, we can delete those guides and do another ghost. And now we can select all the ancillary keyframes right here. And I can just delete those and we still get our ghost here. So once again, I'll hit A to select all the keyframes, T to get my Bezier curves. And now I can just start dragging the Bezier handles out so it matches our ghost guide. All right, if we play this back, we see we get a pretty nice looking overlapping action there. The trunk moves dynamically with the rest of the body, and it's starting to look really nice. It's starting to really come together. So I've given you controllers for the ears, the tuft of hair, and the tail. So I think you should definitely take advantage of that and practice those skills and add a lot more secondary motion and a lot more overlapping action to this elephant. Now, one more thing before we move on from this piece, to get rid of the annotations, they've changed this and moved this in Blender 4.4. So if you go up to View and down to Annotations, this is now the only way to get rid of them. You can't just delete the keyframes outright like you used to be able to. So we can just grab this and either toggle it on and off with the eyeball or just delete it outright. Adding just one singular new principle to our animated loop added so much personality. Check out the difference that it made between our mammoth without overlapping action and our mammoth with overlapping action added. Monumental change. And finally, the last principle that I'll cover with you today is squash and stretch. This is the idea that objects change shape and motion to emphasize weight, speed, and impact. It doesn't necessarily have to be physically accurate, but it can convey fluidity and add a lot of character. In the case of this Neanderthal skull going up and down, it looks fine. It feels like a jump, not too dissimilar from our mammoth. However, with employing squash and stretch, the skull now has so much more character. The stretch happens when it elongates due to speed or momentum, and the squash will happen upon the impact of the ground or some other force. Notice how as it expands or contracts, the skull always maintains its volume. This is really important in keeping the object feeling solid, preserving the weight and physical integrity even as it may deform. For our purposes here today, we will be using a lattice deformer to elongate and squish our lovely mammoth as he hops around. Okay, so to add squash and stretch here to our mammoth, a very easy way to do that will be with a lattice deformer. So I went ahead and hooked everything up for you so you don't have to worry about a lattice deformer today. But we can access it really easily by toggling open the mammoth rig collection up here in our scene outliner. And we can just select our lattice collection right here and toggle that on with the little check mark. And we can turn off the armature with the eyeball. Now, if you've never used a lattice deformer, it's pretty cool. It allows you to essentially deform this box and in turn deform the mesh inside the box. So if I hit tab to go into edit mode, I can change any one of these little vertices and it will deform my mammoth, which is really cool. So you can see the practical application of this, very easily stretching your object or squashing it down. So today we'll be using this in tandem with something called shape keys to be able to animate the shape of the lattice and in turn animate the shape of the mammoth. So let's start by going to our data properties panel. It'll be down here. Instead of being a running man, this time it will be kind of a box that's shifted to the side. And we can just add in a shape key. You'll see this little drop-down toggle right here called shape key. We can just click the plus, and by default, it'll give us a basis. Now this is the base shape. You don't really want to edit on the base shape because we want it to always return to the default of the actual shape of the mammoth. So we need to add another shape key, and we can just rename this to S&S for squash and stretch. Now, if we crank this value up to 1, you'll see that nothing happens, and that's because we have not given it a shape to store right now. So with this value set to 1, we can hit Tab, and we can select all the top pieces here, and we're just going to yank it way up. We're going to yank it up to like right here. Just make it pretty stretched. And we can also move this one up just a little bit, but I actually added another intersection down here so we could kind of keep the base of the mammoth the same so it doesn't get deformed too bad. So as we pull this up, we can actually also increase the size and scale a little bit so that it maintains its original volume so that it feels kind of stretched out. So I'm going to increase the size up here and then select these middle ones and decrease the size so it kind of feels like a toothpaste tube, just kind of squeezed out. So now if I tab back into object mode, we can see that it maintains this shape, but if we change the value back to 0, it goes back to its original shape. So that takes care of stretch. But Elijah, what about squash? Great question, random YouTube viewer. We can add squash very easily by changing the range minimum. So we can change the range minimum to -1, and now instead of having a float from 0 to 1, we now have a range of -1 to 1, with 0 being its default shape. So now if we dial this back to -1, it is very squished, but it doesn't look super great, so we don't have to take it all the way to -1. We could keep it at like -0.5 or -0.3, something like that. But the point is, it gives us the opposite deformation of our positive one, which is awesome. So we're going to set this at 0 for now, while we go through and try to figure out with the annotation pencil once again, exactly how our mammoth should be moving and how he should be squashing and stretching. So let's take a look at this in the orthographic view here. If I zoom in here, let me grab my annotation pencil and let's start at frame 0, our very first frame. Now again, if we back it up a little bit and get some context, he's coming down and he's contacting the ground for the first time at frame 0. So at this point, if you think of the mammoth kind of like a water balloon, the mass of the weight will still be kind of at the top and it will still be coming down. So the top of his weight should still be up here and it is still coming down. So he should be mildly elongated. So let's go ahead and add a keyframe in here. And I will just increase this to something like 0.2 or 0.25, something like that, just to give him a little bit of elongation, but nothing crazy. So let's go forward a few frames to something like maybe frame 3. And at this point, the momentum of his weight has kind of caught up with him. So at this point, now the weight is actually going down and it's dispersing outwards, kind of like a water balloon hitting the ground. So now we should squash him out a little bit. So I will take this down to something like -0.3, something like that. So something like frame 8 or 9, he's actually reaching the peak where he's kind of suspended midair. And at this point, he should kind of just return to his normal volume. So we're going to set this value to 0 and we'll keep trucking. And at this point, now about frame 13 or 14, he's starting to descend again. And at this point, he should be elongating a little bit more again as well. Not anything crazy, but just maybe a little bit more. So I'm just going to add a little bit of elongation, maybe 0.5, something like that. And now we go forward to 0.18. He's falling back down. His center of gravity is way up here. So he should be elongated to something like 0.35, I think is good. And of course, we can go to frame 20 and we can copy the 0 frame and paste it right there. And if we play this back, it's not perfect, but it's starting to resemble something that looks really good. So once again, we can add the cycles modifier and we can play this back and just kind of see what it looks like. It's a little bit clunky, but we're going to go through and we're going to diagnose some of these problems and fix them real quick. So from frame 0, we can see at this point, maybe the bottom out frame should be actually 2. So at frame 2, he gets squished, and maybe I'll add in another frame here and just drag it down a little bit. That way it takes him a minute to return to normal size. And from here, now maybe we take just a little bit more time before we start to extend, but it shouldn't feel like a plateau. It shouldn't feel like it kind of levels out and then starts to shoot up again. It should feel just kind of a little bit less incremental, something like this. And maybe that's a little too high for that. So we'll bring that back down. And I think that should start to feel better. That's feeling a lot better. In fact, if I move this like right there, I think that's feeling about right. Okay, great. So I can take all this, I can ghost it once again, and I'm going to select all of the keyframes that are not necessary, delete them, change this to Bezier with T on the keyboard, and now I'm just going to push and pull these little frames around and make sure I get something that feels right. And if we play that back, it's feeling really smooth and looking really good. And with our final principle for today added, our mammoth feels dynamic and alive. So let's just take a moment to appreciate the employment of these principles in this animation. One with linear boring animation, and the other with our 3 principles applied. The impact of going that extra mile is massive. Whether you're brand spanking new or an experienced motion artist, revisiting the fundamentals is always beneficial. These 3 principles are a powerful combination. But if you're new to animation, you should research and learn all 12 principles to really inform your animation decisions. Be sure to like this video, comment something, and subscribe to School of Motion so you don't miss any educational content. And while you're at it, find me on YouTube, sweetboy.motion, or on Instagram, same tag. I post tutorials, breakdowns, finish work, stuff like that. Thanks for watching.